Now someone has blown the whistle on what went on in Topanga State Park, which is where the Palisades fire sparked. This secret fire mitigation plan from Gavin Newsom was released. Their policy is to let it burn.
This is what happens when you have one party rule. They assume there'll never be any political consequences. Well, that's all changing. They're going to get a shot next year. Hello everyone, welcome to the Steve Hilton Show. I hope you had a fantastic Thanksgiving, my favorite holiday. My first, as I suppose you could say, 100% American. It's the most American of holidays. It's the first one since I renounced my UK citizenship. And by the way, that is something I want to focus on in my opening monologue this week. Coming up later in the show, we got Jen Horn with some amazing new information about what led up to the fire disaster in Los Angeles and how responsible state policy, Gavin Newsom state policy, is for that. And we have a guest here. You've met him before, Herb Morgan. He's running for state controller. And today we've announced a joint investigation that we plan to have into fraud in the California social services spending, prompted by what we're learning about how in Minnesota under Tim Walz, you've had massive fraud. Of course, California is going to be even worse, and we're going to get into all of that. But I want to talk about a story that has prompted a lot of discussion around the question of immigration and assimilation in America. That, of course, is the story of the absolutely outrageous shooting in Washington, D.C., an Afghan national who was responsible for, now we know, the death of a young National Guard officer in D.C., an absolutely terrible tragedy, a vicious crime. And a lot of people have been talking about what that says about our policies of immigration and how we welcome people into this country. And I speak, of course, as someone who has been welcomed into the country. And I feel very, very strongly about this. And actually, there's another Afghan story that has made me think about all of this, because it's a story that I learned on the campaign trail here in California, running for governor a little while ago. A business owner told me that he had hired an Afghan national, very similar situation from the description that he gave to this person who committed this awful crime in DC. Ended up in the Sacramento area. And this person I was talking to runs a business there, and he hired this guy from Afghanistan. And after the second day at work, the Afghan national said, could he please be paid in cash? And the person I was talking to who owned the business said, well, I know that's not how we do it. You can be on payroll. Why do you want to be paid in cash? This person said, because I am worried about losing my welfare benefits. How much do you get in welfare benefits? The answer was $7,000 a month. $7,000 a month. $84,000 a year in welfare benefits. On top of that, this person was told that they didn't need to go shopping for groceries because groceries would be delivered to the place where they're living for free. And the reason for that, he was told, is that Americans are racist and he shouldn't go into a grocery store and do his shopping because of the racism he might encounter from Americans. So every single part of that is so disgusting. The massive bloated welfare spending in California, we're going to get into that a little bit later in my conversation with Herb Morgan, later in this episode. But the attitude that represents is so despicable to me. And there's something very important that as an immigrant, I want to be very clear about. That if you come to this country, you must be required to sign up to the values, the foundational beliefs that make this country what it is. If you want to come to America, you don't come to America and bring with you whatever the social norms and values and attitudes are from the country you came from. No, you come here to become an American. If you have the great honor and privilege of becoming an American, then you sign up to what it means to become an American. And by the way, that includes speaking English. I think it's just unbelievable that you have a situation where so many people who are Americans don't even speak the language. How can you possibly participate fully in society if you don't even speak the language of the country that you're in. And all of this, for me, is made much, much stronger, the feeling I have around this, by looking at what's going on in England. I see the trends in England going so appallingly in the wrong direction. It was bad enough when I left. I moved here with my family, with my wife and my two sons in 2012. Even then, you could go, and for years, you've been able to go to big cities in England, like Birmingham, the second city in England after London. And you could go for massive distances in neighborhoods and not see a street sign in English. It'd be in Urdu. You see people clearly not in any way assimilating. You see stories like the appalling rape gangs, particularly in northern England, from Pakistan, men of Pakistani origin Muslims, and it's all covered up for fear of offending Muslims. One of my friends was a victim, a personal friend of mine, victim of all of that. You see how attitudes, for example, towards women, not just the rape, but actually more broadly, are just completely at odds with modern civilized values in England, but they're just tolerated because it's from a different culture. No, that is completely unacceptable. And what happens in England now, and you can see it get much, much worse. Brexit was supposed to stop the kind of uncontrolled immigration that led to those problems of what they call multiculturalism rather than assimilation. Brexit was supposed to stop all that, but actually seems to have made it worse, and the immigration continued unchecked. And the lesson from all of that, I think, is to take this very seriously, because you can see when you see what's happening in England, and not just in England, but in other countries in Europe as well, France, for example, but also Sweden and Denmark. You see now the social fabric of those countries being really badly torn by a combination of uncontrolled immigration and the failure to enforce assimilation and to sign up to the values of the country that these guests and new immigrants are moving to. And it's a real warning. It's a real warning about what could happen in America if we're not careful. And as I say, for those of you who've heard me on the campaign trail, and I make my speeches all across the state as I'm on the road in California, and I tell the audiences what I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for working people in California, for small business, for common sense and sanity. I go through these things that I'm fighting for. And I also make one other thing clear, that I'm fighting to make sure that this beautiful state that I love does not turn into the country I left. And that is true right across America. And we're seeing these stories now. And it's absolutely vital that we take note of what is happening in Europe and make sure we do not allow anything like that to take hold here in America, and make sure that everyone who is welcomed here as an immigrant, it's absolutely clear. And if you come here to America and you become an American, you really have to become an American. You have to sign up to what America stands for, the principles and values and beliefs that America was founded on. And if you're not prepared to do that, you are not welcome in our country. All right, so here we are with Jen Horn. It's so exciting to see you, especially because we're just back from Thanksgiving holiday. I haven't even shaved. I haven't had time to do that. And you are going to hit me with a bunch of fantastic stories. But first of all, did you have a great Thanksgiving?
I did. And actually, I want to tell you the reason I got to see your new look debuted on Thanksgiving is I was doing a little cooking. I was in charge of the sweet potatoes, the stuffing, some of the items, and I was cooking away in the morning, and I heard a familiar tone on Fox News. And so I ran over to the TV and I saw you, and fantastic as usual. But I have to tell you, this year I was just so grateful. I think I've shared with you, Steve, my dad's been going through some health challenges. There's been a lot going on, and just to have everybody together, that's what it was really all about. So it was a really nice break.
Well, it's my favorite holiday. It really is. As an American, proud American who's now all in for America. I know you and I have had this conversation. I've officially renounced my UK citizenship.
Very fancy.
So thank goodness, when you see what's going on in England.
Yeah.
Anyway, I feel it's just a wonderful, wonderful holiday for that exact reason, that it really is all about the things that matter and being thankful for that. And it's just very special. Always a great time and a great moment of reflection.
Absolutely.
So, what have we got anything to be thankful for in terms of what's going on in California?
I think that we're in the countdown for Gavin Newsom's last days in office. I think that may be something we can be grateful for. So Obviously, a lot of people were paying attention to the burn areas. We're coming up on the 1 year anniversary of the Altadena and the Palisades fire. That'll be on January 7th. And I thought it was kind of neat. The good side to this story is that on Saturday, a lot of people showed up in Palisades for Small Business Saturday to help support some of the businesses that are either still open, trying to reopen. And it was really nice to see people's goodwill. But what wasn't nice to see, Steve, in the last few days is the let it burn policy of Gavin Newsom in California. I don't know if you've heard about this yet, but this story is breaking. It will be everywhere. So this secret fire mitigation plan from Gavin Newsom was released, and it was called Let It Burn. Literally, not making it up. Even had to write it down so I wouldn't forget.
Oh my goodness.
And what this means is that instead of working on fire mitigation in state parks and on state land, their policy is to let it burn, because they bow at the altar of the environmentalists. I know you and I have talked about this many times, that there is no reason for them to clean the forest, manage the forest, to do brush clearance, to do fire breaks, because they don't want to trample the precious spine flower or whatever else may be in the way, and they don't want to use heavy equipment. So now someone has blown the whistle on what went on in Topanga State Park, which is the scene of the Lockman fire, which is where the Palisades fire sparked. And so, according to the reports, not only did the firefighters that reported the smoldering get sent away, and this fire was left to just smolder, even knowing that these windy conditions were coming, but before that, there was no attempt to do any brush management, no attempt to clear. And when firefighters showed up, they were sent away by a state employee who called these areas in the park avoidance areas. So they show up concerned about the state of Topanga State Park. A state employee says, well, you can look around these areas, but showed them on the map certain areas to avoid because of the environmental impact. No heavy equipment, no trampling. And they actually called these avoidance areas in this mitigation plan. So I think, pardon the pun, that things are really heating up for Gavin Newsom, who's just tried to play pass the buck. When his state plan is let it burn, think about how that plays out with the fires of the past. That's exactly what California did in many cases. Just let it burn. There was no attempt to clean up areas. Think about like the PG&E fire up in Paradise. It was, well, don't fix the lines. We knew there were problems with the power lines. Don't worry about that. We'll just deal with the impact after it's done. Is it possible that California has been living with the let it burn philosophy for even longer than we realized, but now we're just paying attention because Palisades was completely wiped out?
This is amazing. I just want to dig into some of these details. So what is the new where's the new information coming from? Is a whistle? Just remind us of that, this policy.
There's this policy that was snuck out, basically, that just took off on social media. So it was obtained through a FOIA request, and the information was released. It's been going viral, and you can read it directly from the information that was released out of the governor's office and out of Sacramento. It's incredible.
It's absolutely stunning. And then the avoidance areas, that's a local policy rather than a state policy.
That's a state policy, apparently. So
because it's so confusing here, but for people just to be aware, the origin of the Lockman fire that was with January 1st, that then smoldered, they didn't put it out. We've been hearing whistleblower accounts from the fire department about that. That turned into the Palisades fire. That is in Topanga State Park, is that right?
That's right.
And is that in the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy area? That's a state agency, right?
It's a state agency. The Topanga State Park is run by the state. Yes, it is.
Yeah, so this is also, you can't blame this on anyone else. This is all state.
Mm-hmm. And
avoidance areas, and that avoidance areas for any kind of mitigation or any kind of involvement of equipment or personnel of any kind, because you want to let the environment be. I mean, by the way, this is also, in line with what we've already been learning about when they tried to replace the wooden poles with metal ones in Topanga State Park, because they said that would, the work was actually stopped because it would affect the milk vetch, was a particular plant that they wanted to protect.
Yep. And this is why we have to ask ourselves. And first, I don't necessarily need to play the blame game, but what I don't think is helpful is when Gavin Newsom says he had nothing to do with it. The state had nothing to do with it. Karen Bass says we had nothing to do with it. Nobody wants to take any ownership. And here's the thing about leadership. Leadership requires some people to say, hey, here's what happened. Here's where we failed. Here's what we are going to do to make things better. But we're not hearing that from the state. We're not hearing that from the city. We're not hearing that from the county. We're not hearing that from anybody. And in fact, they're just playing past the buck. Somebody needs to take control and say, here are the things that went wrong. Maybe we need to reevaluate our avoidance areas. Maybe we really need to think about what's more important, human life or the life of plants. And look, I am not anti-environment. And I know you are too. This is why we love California, Steve, because it's so beautiful. But when it comes to wiping out an entire city, or maybe engaging in some landscaping, bring on the leaf blowers and the heavy equipment. Let's protect the people.
Yeah, I
That
mean,
should
people were
always
being,
come first.
we hear story, we covered this nearly a year ago, just in the immediate aftermath of the fires, where people were said they were being, residents were being fined for doing brush clearance on their property in those areas, fined for doing it, for taking the responsible action that actually the state or the city or the county or someone in authority should have been doing. The residents knew, they took responsibility, they tried to do, I mean, even Caitlyn Jenner has told stories like this. She has a property up there, Malibu, and people were fined, were stopped from doing it. And it is amazing to hear this now, that this is this long-standing policy, because again, there's no excuse for it. This fire risk and the fire condition, this is something that's been in the news for years. We've had the mega fires in the Sierras a couple of years, really, the natural fires have been there, part of the story of the Sierras and elsewhere in California forever. But the scale of them, because of these extreme environmentalist policies, this is not new. This
No.
is, so at the very least, you would think, I don't know, let's go back to, was it 2019? I think one of the really bad years for mega wildfires. At that point, you would think that and Gavin Newsom's the governor at that point,
Of
would think,
course.
right, we just had some really bad wildfires. Let's, sit around a table and get everyone together and say, right, are we in the right place? When you have a disaster like that, and remember, this is all extreme environmentalism that prompts all this. That's the year where the calculation was done that the CO2 emissions, the carbon dioxide emissions, just from those wildfires were greater than all the reductions in CO2 emissions from the previous 20 years of climate policy in California. So even on their own terms, right, whichever way you look at it, you would think that they would sit down and say, right, let's review all this. Are we in the right place? What is going on? What are the policies? Nothing like that happened.
There is nothing. And that's where we are really being failed in leadership. We need someone who is going to take accountability, who will stand up to the environmentalists and say, look, we want to be as respectful as we can to the environment, but we need to be able to protect the people. We need, as you mentioned, it's worse for the environment to have all of these CO2 emissions from the fire. And forget, as we go down the path of green initiatives in California, how many batteries we have to consider are going to be impacted in fires like these. This is the double-edged sword, right, of going down the path of solar and to battery powered rather than gas and fossil fuels, is that the fallout can sometimes be worse during fire situations. But Gavin Newsom, I think for a long time has just wanted to take the money from environmentalists and to be the rest of us be damned. That has to stop. And the fact that there were these avoidance areas, this should infuriate every single one of us, that when the fire department does show up and they're told, well, we want to go in and check things out, and they're told, well, you can't come into these areas. That's the state. We own that property. We should be able to go into those areas. We should be able to maintain those areas. It just adds to the story of this fire, and how, yes, it was not caused by one person's error, but a comedy of errors no one's laughing at in the response, whether it's failures of the fire department because they're understaffed from the sheriff's department and from the LAPD. You have Karen Bass flying all over the world to Ghana. And now you have Newsom, who laughed. I think what adds insult to injury, laughed when President Trump, in the year you referenced, I think it was 2018, 2019, Trump comes to town, is looking at the fire damage with Newsom. And he laughed about Trump saying that we need forest management, that we need to clean the floor of the forest. And Trump is right. He may not have said it as eloquently as some, but he was absolutely right. And the nerve of Gavin Newsom to laugh when he knows that he had these things going on and that this was his mitigation plan, which was no mitigation at all. It's insulting.
It's really let it burn. Amazing,
Yep.
amazing. And then the other thing that I just find, is so insulting is when you hear these people talk and don't take any responsibility for the role of government policy in all of this. They end up blaming the victims, and
Of
they say,
course.
well, this is because you have development in, fire prone areas, and it's your fault for building houses there, and whatever. Like as if you can't mitigate risks with just sensible policies like fire breaks around your home or whatever. I mean, it's just so insulting to everybody's intelligence, and they never take responsibility. And this is what happens when you have one party rule, and they're not held accountable by the media. They don't care about that. They assume there'll never be any political consequences, that the only threat they ever face is from the left, and they get primaried and from another Democrat. Well, that's all changing, because we're waking up in California, and they're going to get a shot next year. I'm telling you.
I believe it. And this isn't the only story for Gavin, by the way. So Carl DeMaio, who is a friend of ours, the assemblyman from San Diego, he has come out with some news about the deficit. $18 billion is the current deficit of California. He expects that that number could go up to $35 billion, which is just insane. And 73% of that, Steve, $13 billion is going to provide illegal immigrants with health care. 73% of our deficit money, we know where it's going. It's not even a question. It's not like we have to go, wow, we've got a spending problem. Like, we can see it. We know where it's going. And this is Gavin Newsom. He wants to run for president, but this is the stuff that he's giving us in California. I don't know how he defends it in Kentucky.
I mean, it's truly amazing. And they don't, again, it's the shamelessness. It's like, yeah, whatever. And then he runs around saying we're number one and this and that and the other. And I don't know whether but it is interesting, because you see some of the national coverage of Gavin Newsom, and the national political reporters truly don't seem interested at all
Right.
in digging into the record. It's, he's great at trolling Trump on social media. I think it's all of our responsibility. Certainly, here's the way I put it: when I'm governor, starting the beginning of 2027, probably just as Gavin Newsom is starting his presidential campaign, I'll not only be cleaning up the mess that Gavin Newsom left behind, in the process of cleaning up the mess, I'll be telling the rest of the country how big the mess was, so they can avoid the same fate nationally.
Yeah. And all you have to do is do a little comparison. And I know Gavin hates this, but it was Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, who said, look, we don't have the taxes that California has, but guess what? We don't also have this deficit. Our deficit is zero, where California taxes the heck out of everybody. And we're $18 billion in the hole. So ask yourself, why are people leaving the state, Gavin? Well, just do the quick math and see that they're paying less in Texas and their state government is run more efficiently. Why wouldn't you want to leave a state that is going downhill fast because of his policies?
And you've got, just another point on that, on that deficit number, is that 13 billion is an increase from the last year's spending on free healthcare for illegal immigrants, even as Gavin Newsom pretended that he was cutting it, because there was an outcry over this spending in the first half of this year as the budget process was going on. And I remember Gavin did one of these, like totally shifty announcements where he pretended that he was responding to the public outcry by saying it's okay, we're going to tighten eligibility requirements and all this on the free healthcare for illegal immigrants, in order to look as if he's placating public outrage over it. But if you actually look at the numbers, the spending was all along planned to increase, and as Carl has pointed out, has increased.
I stalk you, Steve. That's why you had to put that beard on, so I wouldn't recognize you. But I stalk you as you go around the state. And I saw that you came out and talked about a plan for going through the fraud in our state of California after the fraud was revealed. What was it? 250 million in Minnesota by Tim Walz. You remember Kamala. And I cannot wait to see what you are going to find in California as governor, because can you imagine, with the amount of money that we're talking about, 18 billion just in deficit alone, 13 billion in illegal immigrant healthcare, all of the other crazy spending that the state of California does that we know it does. What will you find when you actually start looking under the hood? Can you imagine? I mean, I think you could get California balanced if you knocked out all of the fraud that exists in the state, especially with the amount of money that we pay in taxes. I think you're going to be able to send refund checks back to people because we've been overpaying for this fraud for so long.
Exactly, because and by the way, there's a really good conversation coming up later in this episode with Herb Morgan, who's running for controller, about exactly how we plan to do that. The details are really interesting about how we can actually make that happen. But the broad point is exactly right, Jen, which is because you've had no scrutiny, because they've had it all their own way, it's just and the bloat is just off the charts, and the failure is so phenomenal. It's just extraordinary to me that they've gotten away with it for so long.
I know. And the other candidates that are running in this race with you, I think Tom Steyer might be the most infuriating at this point. Eric Swalwell's a laugh and a half, but you listen to Tom Steyer's latest commercial and he's talking about how the Democrats have ruined the state. Well, no kidding. But Tom, the last time I checked, you're a Democrat. I always love to say, Steve, I love these people that have literally run the state into the ground and then show up like they just got to the party. Like, he is part of the problem. All of these Democrats who are running in this race for California governor are all complicit in the stuff that we're talking about today, whether it's the poor fire management or it's the overspending or it's the fraud or it's the waste. I was talking to Sheriff Villanueva about the waste in homelessness. I was out over the holiday weekend and I saw this man, Steve, literally sitting on a fire hydrant with no pants on. He had a sheet wrapped around his waist. That was it.
Well, you were in luck.
And I was in luck that there was a sheet by all accounts. I was not feeling happy for that poor fire hydrant, but the point is, we spend so much money on these problems and nothing is getting fixed. Nothing is getting fixed. And you can't be Tom Steyer and get angry and throw around cuss words and pretend like you're just so disgusted when you built it.
He's the absolute worst, because when you dig into, and I've been making this point along, and it keeps becoming more apparent, when you actually dig into the reason that everything in California is the most expensive in the country, that we have the highest costs for gas, electric, water, all of these things, housing, everywhere you look, the most expensive. He's talking about affordability. The number one driver of the high costs for everyone in California is their climate agenda, as they call it. Guess who was the leading champion of their climate agenda for years? He had this thing next to Tom bloody Steyer. It's like, of all the people to talk about affordability, right, he's got the least standing. Sit down, Tom Steyer. And I think the fire hydrant story, I'm afraid, is just a perfect analogy. So here in California, what do we have? We have fire hydrants with no water, but we do have crazy homeless people sitting on top of them. Naked homeless people. I mean,
it's all connected, isn't it? It's so interesting how we can go in this short amount of time that we're together, talking about failed fire policy, talking about the overspending, the fraud, and the waste, and then the gubernatorial candidates who want to continue it. And it's all part of the same problem. You have politicians who are serving at the altar of environmentalists and special interests in the unions who do not care about California residents. And that is at the root of the problem of California, is that they are serving one class of people and it's not the people that live in the state.
Exactly. We're going to make them accountable for these failures, and it's going to happen in the governor's campaign. It's going to happen in earnest next year, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Jen, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Great to see you, Steve.
I'm very happy to be joined by my friend and partner in the effort to bring sanity to California, Herb Morgan, who you've met before. He's running for state controller. We are excited about getting to grips with the bloat in California's massive expanded government spending after all these years of one-party rule. And the particular focus, Herb, today is the announcement that we've made jointly that we're going to have an audit of all of California's social spending, because what we see in Minnesota with this Tim Walz scandal, where you've got $1 billion of fraud in the system there in Minnesota, we can be absolutely certain that it's much, much worse here in California. We already know that there was $20 billion or so of fraud from the EDD system, the Employment Development Department, during the pandemic, with checks being sent to prisoners in jail and people on death row, dead people. We know, of course, about the state audit of homelessness spending that said that basically $24 billion or so was completely wasted. That's just two bits of it. We've got all these other parts of the spending that goes on in California that basically isn't investigated at all. Gavin Newsom seems completely uninterested in any of it. The EDD scandal didn't prompt any kind of urgent action. And so I just think that this reminds us, this Minnesota scandal reminds us that we're likely to have a far, far worse situation here in California. And the two of us are going to get to grips with it. Herb, tell us the plan.
Well, look, the plan, Steve, and everything you said is exactly right. What happened in Minnesota should be the playbook for us, for our team in California. And California is multiple sizes of what Minnesota is. And the level and the depth of the one-party control is greater. So given the fact that we're a wealthier state, we have more money involved, there's more money at play, all of our programs are bigger, it makes sense that the problem itself is bigger. And we talk about audits, and we have technology and programs do get audited. But what I want to do is go a step further, Steve. I want to give a view to the California public into spending on a daily level. We have the technology, we can deliver more and better services. You know, when you look at, for example, what percent we pay in overhead to administer our programs, right? All of our programs of compassion are designed to help the citizens of our state, whether it's K through 12, whether it's Medi-Cal, CalFresh, CalWorks, Gavin's EDD problem, the homeless situation, the UCs, all of these are programs of compassion. And it makes sense that if you're managing programs of compassion, you want the highest percentage of that money to go to the people it's supposed to help, and the lowest percentage of that money to be spent on overhead. But on all of these programs, even at something like CalFresh, right, which is our SNAP version, with
So
the CalFresh,
I want to get into the details of some of these. So,
yeah,
because these are big items of spending. So CalFresh is food stamps, effectively. The other people may know it as food stamps. That's the California branded name of it, CalFresh. So how does that work, and how big is it? Let's just take these in turn.
yeah. So CalFresh is about $16 or $17 billion a year. This is our state, only, right? And we're administering the Fed SNAP benefits. There's about 5 million of us that receive that out of, about 39 million citizens in the state. This is the one where we're not doing very well, but we're doing better than in any other program. We spend about 14% on overhead. And the reason we do better in this one is because the feds are all over it, right? It's the federal government and the Trump administration. They control a lot of how we administer this program. So they take steps to aggressively make sure we're not stealing as much money as we might be in some of the other programs. But just CalFresh alone, we're talking about $16 to $17 billion. That's all federal money, by the way.
What about CalWorks? What's that?
Well, CalWorks, we're talking about this sort of welfare to work system. What a great idea, right? Give people a lift up, ensure that they're working to make these things happen. These are administered by counties, okay? But the problem is each county has a different method of administration. There's no uniform reporting technology. We don't actually know what percent is overhead versus what percent goes to help the people. We do know this: of all the states that have a similar program, California has the worst participation rate in actually working, right? So this is a program, again, a program of compassion. That's what government's supposed to do. We're supposed to give people a lift up. They're supposed to work. And of all the states that engage in this, we have the lowest percentage that work. We have the highest percentage spent on overhead per person. We don't have a uniform system of audit across all the different 58 counties. And we're talking about roughly 29% of the money spent, about 8 billion, goes to families, and the estimates are 71% on overhead. So
What? That's from
71%.
CalWorks.
Yeah. Now imagine you and your family are looking at supporting a program of compassion, a charity, the Make-A-Wish Foundation. You're gonna look at that and you're gonna say, well, how much are they spending on overhead and salaries and travel and blah blah blah, and how much is helping the people? You're gonna make your decision that way. Well, the voters should be doing the same thing, Steve. 71% of CalWorks is overhead.
So that's amazing. And also, by the way, on you talk about welfare to work. I mean, you mentioned when you said labor force participation. Do you mean when you say participation? Do you mean overall labor force participation in California?
No, I mean the CalWorks, the program, the requirement is you're supposed to work for your welfare, and you have a
Right.
limited time where you can be on it.
I
What
see.
we have in California is people aren't actually working.
Right. But they're getting it anyway.
They're getting it anyway. We're not
Got it.
enforcing the work requirement. And there's also many instances of fraudulent statements being made, just basic fraud,
Right.
just like we saw with Gavin's ED
Okay.
problem with the EDD situation.
Well, so then I would add to that what I just mentioned, two things. Well, one that I just mentioned, which is that this is a program that's supposed to get people working, right? We have
Yes.
historically across the economy now, beyond just CalWorks, we have historically low and one of the lowest in the country labor force participation rates in America. So the proportion of the adult working age population that's actually working in California is around 62%. At its peak, it was around 60, nearly 70%. So that's millions of Californians who could be working but are not. And this is a program supposed to address that. And it's not, because the other important data point in all of that conversation is that we have the highest unemployment rate in the country, which is completely unacceptable. So you go through these programs one by one, and you've mentioned a couple of times overhead, but the Minnesota scandal wasn't just overhead, it was out and out theft. It was criminal, which is why this has become an issue recently, because it's come to light through actual federal prosecutions. And you have some of these programs in Minnesota, and that's why the range of them is so interesting. It's on housing and health, Medicaid in the case of Minnesota, and a few other things, food programs, giving out food to people, where they were just completely fake recipients. It was just made up, and people were stealing the money and spending it on luxury travel and cars, and in some cases overseas spending. And so it's completely fraudulent. And what are the, if you just look, what is the scale of the spending in California? I mean, just give us a sense of the overall budget and what the size of the issue is here in California, not the individual programs, but the total.
Yeah, so the total budget this fiscal year, which was started July 1, right? So we're about almost halfway through, is about $325 billion. Now that number is up from $185 billion just 5 years ago.
That's amazing. Can I just stop you there, Herb? Because a number that, we're both out there on the campaign trail, and one of the points that I make is that the budget of the state of California has doubled in the last 10 years, from 160 billion to just over 320 billion, as you said. But what you just said is like it's nearly doubled in 5 years. That's an amazing number. I didn't know that.
It's an amazing growth rate. If you double in 10 years, that's a 7.2% annualized growth rate. Well, our economy has not grown by 7.2%. Our population hasn't grown by 7.2%. So what we've done is we've decided as a state, we are going to spend far more of our GDP on programs.
What is the rate, by the way, from your number, 185 5 years ago to 320 now? I mean, that's nearly doubled.
That's nearly doubled. What is that, a CAGR? I have to do the math, but it's probably 15, 18% consolidated annual growth rate of spending. And so the question, though, as a stakeholder in the state of California, okay, great. If that's the decision of the legislature, who are elected by the people, fine. But what I want is results. What am I getting? Are my programs of compassion educating better K through 12 outcomes, better UC graduates, better prison outcomes, better state parks, better CalWorks, better Medi-Cal, better EDD, better homeless? The answer to every single one of those is no. So if spending goes up and results go down,
Well, the other part
there's
of the spending going up that we have to remember is that, well, it has to be paid for, and states can't run a deficit. So this has to be, we can't borrow in that sense, right? So this is why we have the highest taxes in the country. We've got to pay for all this as we go. You have to pay as you go. Is that right?
it is right. And it's funny, legally we're required to have a balanced budget. And so we take that budget in the budgeting process. We'll get the January, and then we'll get the May revision, and we'll say, okay, here's our budget. It's balanced. Nowhere in the world of finance is a budget balanced when it raids a reserve fund in the budgeting process. It was so absurd that the Democrat controller, back when they did this, said, you can't do that. Come on, guys, this is ridiculous. They went around the state controller, a Democrat. They went to a judge. They got a California judge to say, a balanced budget is what you say it is. And they literally redefined the word. Kamala Harris was the attorney general at the time. We'd go back and get the exact dates. But they literally redefined balanced budget. So California voters have done a lot of great things over the years, things like Prop 13. One of the other things was, let's have a reserve fund, a rainy day fund. So when our revenues are short, right, we go into recession, they will happen. We go to the reserve fund to make up for it so we don't have to shut down our schools and parks. That's a great idea. But what the last 8 years with the Newsom administration and the 100% Democrat supermajority control of everything, they've said, no, when we budget, we'll actually raid the reserve funds so that they just get replenished during the year. It's absolutely irresponsible from a fiscal perspective. And I think the powers that be, the powers that run this state, they intentionally run and promote candidates for the statewide executive offices that are unqualified, that don't understand, that don't know what they're doing. That is part of their plan. They can't have somebody like me who actually knows how to balance a budget.
So let's look at go back to the fraud point, right?
Yeah.
And the comparison with Minnesota. That's the reason we're talking about this today. So we know already. So you got the 320, what is it? 325 billion total.
325 this year. It'll go up next year.
Okay. So we know already that in the past, recent past, you've had 20 billion. That was the number for the EDD fraud, right? That was during the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah. That was just the fraud portion.
That's just the fraud. Exactly. That's not error. That's not,
right.
That's not overhead or ineffective results. That's pure fraud, right? $20 billion.
Pure theft. 5.9 billion has been recovered, by the way.
Okay. So you had 20 billion in fraud there. Then you look at the homeless spending, the state audit there. Now that was, I think the number there was 24 billion. That's homeless spending, which the state auditor said couldn't be accounted for in terms of where it went or what it delivered. At the same time, you've now got a criminal investigation, a federal prosecution on homeless spending from Palisades, the U.S. attorney for the Central District, looking at the homeless spending, particularly in LA, about whether there was fraud there. And so we can assume, that you don't bring these investigations without some kind of predicate that there's a crime being committed. So right there in just those two areas, you've got evidence of some kind of, in the case of the EDD, a lot of fraud. And with the homeless spending, we don't know what proportion of it was stolen, but there's a criminal investigation right now.
Well, actually, there's criminal charges. There's been arrests made.
Okay.
And so it's actually progressed further. And I do think we have an idea on the percentage.
Okay, go for it.
So the people that were arrested, one example recently was a fellow named Cody Holmes. Cody Holmes formed a nonprofit, and he took a grant of $26 million from Inside Safe, which is LA City's administration of homeless funds. He took the $26 million according to the charges from Palisades. This is what he's been charged with. and he spent $2.2 million to pay off his American Express bill. The American Express bill, according to the federal charges, included Rodeo Drive, Beverly Hills expenditures for personal use. So off the top, 2.2 million. Then he went and he bought a building for $27 million that was to be rehabbed to house homeless people. Sounds good to me. The problem is, according to the charges, Mr. Holmes had that building under contract for $11 million personally. So he double flipped the escrow. Anybody who's in real estate knows what I'm talking about. And he pocketed $16 million. So he got a grant for 26 and he pocketed 18 within a month of getting the money. That is the story that we're saying over and over. And so what was Cody Holmes' connection to state government? All you have to do is go online and look at the donations that he's made politically. Who did he donate to? Jackie Irwin, his assembly member in Los Angeles, over and over again. Rob Bonta, the attorney general, over and over again. Act Blue, when he reached the maximum for the two, he goes to Act Blue to donate. So the question that I think is people should be asking, not how much fraud and crime there is. We know it's rampant. It's the most inefficient, ineffective use of taxpayer money this country has ever seen. The question is, why aren't the law enforcement agencies of our state, such as the Attorney General's office, the DA of Los Angeles, why aren't they charging these people with these crimes? Why are the charges coming instead from the feds? Because the feds are the only one doing their job.
Right. So now let's go to what you and I could do.
Yeah.
And the audit. And let's end on that, Herb. What we put out a statement jointly today. We're taping this Monday morning, December the 1st, in the wake of the news of the Minnesota scandal and our, very strongly rooted assumption that it's much, much worse in California. So what exactly could we do in terms of an audit?
Well, first off, you have the state controller, the role that I'm going for, has unlimited audit authority over anybody, anything, or any entity that touches California funds. But what happens is the state controller picks and chooses the current one where she or he might do an audit. Maybe it's a school district here, a payroll system there. And then individual programs and agencies, of course, have to contract and have their own financials audited as any organization would. But what I propose is to take the whole thing a step further. We have technology that is cheap and ubiquitous. That technology can read bank ledger transactions. Just like you, Steve, can log into your Chase account and you say, well, hook up my Schwab account or my B of A account. I want to see all my accounts. I want to see my 401k from Fox News, right? It's all right there. You can link. That technology is ultra cheap. We can harness that technology. And when I'm the state controller, I will require recipients of our money to sign on and use that technology. It won't cost them more money. They won't need to do a study. It's not pensionable income, right? They simply, to get their money that's allocated by the legislature, they hook their bank account. Then we get every transaction every day instead of looking at an audit that's 3 years old. And then we use artificial intelligence to analyze the spend on a daily basis. Then we can bring the overhead, we can eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse. We bring the overhead down to 7, 8, 9% in our programs. And then our programs of compassion actually help the homeless, actually educate our kids.
So how does that work, the downward pressure? I mean, again, I want to sort of look at the two parts of it. Let's just go where you just were, which is overhead, bringing that right down. I mean, you said on the other, what was it on CalWorks, it's 70% overhead? And you're talking about bringing it down to 7 and so on.
To 7, yeah. Actually getting the money to the people.
So how does merely using a new accounting system bring that kind of transformation?
So if you believe as I do, I'm making the assumption that there is massive amounts of Shangri-La type waste, fraud, and abuse, or Minnesotian waste, fraud, and abuse. So for example, let's take that example of the Cody Holmes and the bill of sale, what he's discovered. The minute that the $2 million went to American Express, that transaction's public information. And it's on the internet and it's stored on an immutable blockchain ledger. The people who are interested, whether they're researchers at Caltech, moms and dads sitting at home curious about school district spending, they will see that spending. They will flag that spending. And so what we'll do is it's like a giant security camera and it will dissuade the bad actors. California has become a giant criminal operation. It is a money laundering operation of size and scope the world has never, ever seen. What we have, what I'm so excited about, your campaign, my campaign, is if you look at the people stepping up for these 8 positions, these are not politicians. These are citizens who are upset, who care, who want to donate their time, they want to help, they want to fix the problem. And then we want to go back and retire and play golf or do whatever it is that we want to do. This is the right time for California to flip. And I'm loving the team that is starting to form as we move into the campaign season of 2026.
I agree with that strongly. We'll be doing much more along those lines. But on the so the first point on the new system that you would introduce is, and just to be clear, are you able to introduce this as state controller without reference to the legislature?
That's right. So the state controller has plenary authority to dictate reporting. Okay, I can't go and say, change your accounting system. That's part of upgrading and that's normal and fine. But I want the reporting to be daily. The way it works now is agencies like, say, San Diego Association of Governments or whoever, these agencies will send a financial report annually and they'll maybe get an audit. Maybe they'll have deficiencies in the audit. That's great if it's 1948. But this is 2026 and we are California. We are the world headquarters of technology and innovation. We can get people in Silicon Valley to help us, to volunteer, to build these systems that will show every transaction every day. I call it my trans movement. Every transaction, every day, transparent government, transforming the delivery of government services. With $325 billion, there is no program of compassion that we cannot deliver at the highest level.
So that's going forward. So you can require the reporting of that on a real-time daily basis.
Yes.
All the spending, every cent.
And I will do that. And I have the power to withhold funding until they comply.
Very clear.
Yes.
What about retrospective? And I suppose that's the point of what we're talking about today. But can you just give us a bit more information about how we might go about unearthing and holding people accountable for the transgressions of the past and those that are probably ongoing?
Yeah. So it's a great question because prospectively, obviously, we're going to do this. But I think we need to go retrospectively. We're not going back to the time of the gold rush. I think we can wipe whatever happened in 1849 off. But I do think we need to go back about 8 years. We've had 8 years, all 8 offices, one party. We've got an insurance commissioner running around the world on African safaris instead of lowering insurance costs. We've got questions about our attorney general's activities that are now rampant. We have major questions about the governor's office. So I don't want to use my office for political gain or purposes. I want to be fair. We're going to take all 8 years of all transactions from all 8 offices, and we are going to publish every transaction, put it out on a blockchain ledger, and any data scientist that wants to analyze it, including me, will be able to do that. And I think it's important for the American people to know, what's happened in California during the last 8 years.
So every transaction is that possible? Is that feasible if it wasn't done originally in a?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is the era of big data. This is what AI can deliver. This might not have been possible 10 years ago, but it's very possible now.
And this is going to be something presumably that therefore is also providing the raw material for potential prosecutions where there is suspicion of fraud.
Yes. And I think it will provide overwhelming evidence for fraud prosecution, and
Right.
which is why we need an attorney general who's capable
Yes.
and willing.
So it's not just federal. Got
That's
it.
right. It should be the state attorney general doing what Bill Lasaley is doing their job for them.
Herb, this is very exciting. I think it's a great example of the difference, the very practical, immediate difference that we can make when we're elected, and bring this kind of rigor and sanity and responsibility to government that's just been allowed to run rampant with no constraint for so long. And we can all see the results for a disaster in terms of the outcomes: highest unemployment rate, highest poverty rate, worst roads, everything a disaster, highest cost for everything that matters. So we can see all the outcomes, they're a disaster. And what we've learned in a couple of cases, homelessness spending, EDD, we are aware of massive fraud and theft. And what we don't know is the scale of the fraud and theft in all the other parts of the spending. And that's what your retrospective audit will deliver. And your plan for the future will be to leave no hiding place for any of that. So thank you very much, Herb. Great to see you. Tell everyone where they can follow you and get involved with your campaign.
Thanks so much, Steve. So herbmorgan.com. Of course, all the socials, you name the social, we're on it. It's at Herb, the number 4 controller, at Herb 4 controller. Thank you for having me on here today, Steve. I'm loving your campaign, by the way.
Likewise. We'll see each other very soon. Thank you, Herb.
All right. Take care.
All right, that is our show for today. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm very happy to be back after the Thanksgiving break. Looking forward to a busy round of campaigning up and down California. Do come along to our events if we are in your area. Make sure you follow the campaign at stevehiltonforgovernor.com. Love to have your support. We're building our volunteer army to bring sanity back to our state. So we'd love to have you with us. And of course, you can follow this show, The Steve Hilton Show, on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you back here next week.